Yet the Fed just bought $34.8 billion in 10-year bonds over 2 days, and then I think somewhere in the neighborhood of $20 billion in 3-year treasuries at the same time. What does that say? I mean, that to me says that there is virtually no demand for our treasuries, that the Fed is resorting to quiet, stealth quantitative easing through their SOMA group, that they're not talking about it. They say they're still shedding treasuries and mortgage-backed securities off of their balance sheet, yet they're loading up quietly on 3 and 10-year, which is a form of yield curve control. We have tariffs that, on one hand, I could say they're noble in their pursuit of reshoring strategic and critical manufacturing centers, like for AI or microchips or pharmaceuticals or steel or airplane parts, things that we need for the security and the national security at that of this country, for sure. But, we also have to remember Triffin's dilemma, which more or less says that if the world runs on US dollars, that they will always require more dollars than we can provide just in global trade. And so we have to export dollars, which ultimately ends up through various factors eviscerating our manufacturing. We will always run a trade imbalance if we are the world reserve currency, but it is that process of selling or buying the world's goods with US dollars and then expecting them to reinvest the proceeds in US treasuries that has kept our interest rates low and our goods cheap and our asset prices high and our standard of living higher. There's a problem here. You can't probably have both. It almost seems to me that the administration has come to this realization, that they realize that perhaps being the world reserve currency isn't as glamorous as it once was, or as vital as it once was, and perhaps becoming more independent rather than and self-reliant rather than relying on everyone else for the things that we need in this country, from military equipment to pharmaceuticals, maybe has greater importance. Despite offering right now, you got 4.5% on the 10-year treasury. They wanted it lower than that. You could argue that the demand for the bonds is fading very fast, and the Fed has to come in and buy the 3 and the 10-year at the same time that they've been paying 4% interest since January. The dollar's lost over 9%, reflecting, I believe, a broader loss in confidence of the dollar as a safe haven in the global markets. And so this is a big deal, and they're not saying, or not really publicly talking about, the fact that they're coming in and intervening in a form of yield curve control, trying to keep the rates low. And even with that being said, the rates keep creeping higher. And that's the market's way of saying, no, we're stronger than you are, Federal Reserve. The market, this is a massive market. And if the Fed were to really come in and start to intervene, you're talking hyperinflation, to print all of that money to come in and buy those treasuries to keep yields down, which is the same problem that we got into at the very beginning. The whole crux of all of this, let's say, all of the distortions and not only in asset prices and asset values, but misallocations in the way resources were deployed and capital was deployed, and incentivizing debt, is because of suppression of interest rates. And we haven't learned our lesson. You go back to 2008, the Fed's balance sheet was $800 billion. It's over $6 trillion now. It was at $9 trillion at one point during the pandemic. But all of that money that the Fed has spent and added to their balance sheet has been in the form of mortgage-backed securities or treasuries, or during the pandemic expanded into government bonds, which they shouldn't do. But these are all things that are incentivized to bring interest rates down, to continue to foster this illusion of easy money and strong dollar. And well, the game is rapidly coming to an end in the respect that we owe roughly $28 trillion worth of debt or bond payments that come due in 2028. And we're at best will take in $15 trillion in tax revenue. He's talking about lowering taxes. That gets us halfway there. And you have Trump asking to jack up the debt ceiling. Doge has only saved us about $250 billion or so, not the $2 trillion that they had thought they could make, because Congress isn't really cooperating. And so at the same time, we have Doge trying to eliminate waste and fraud. We have more irresponsible fiscal policy and quiet stealth QE by the Fed monetary policy under the seams. This is why, part of the reason, on top of, sanctions that or what do you call them, tariffs masquerading as sanctions or flat out sanctions, along with the realization that we're in a very bad place with interest rates and inflation, even to the point where Powell had to come out and say that he's actually contemplating perhaps abandoning the dual mandate, in the respect that how can you keep inflation low and not let it get away? And at the same time, if no one's buying our treasuries, how do you finance the debt? Well, it looks like, quietly Soma came in and started buying treasuries because of this. And the information, or the reporting by the Bureau of Labor Statistics that keeps saying inflation is getting low. Well, I don't know. Maybe they don't shop or travel the same places that I do, but it doesn't seem to me that the cost of living is decreasing. In fact, every single day, month, and year, it seems to be getting more expensive. So we're in a sticky wicket right now, and this is just another sign of it. And I think the world has grown tired of taking our debt, realizing that we are, we sanction, we inflate, and why would you want to sell goods to a country for dollars that can be created out of thin air, and then put the proceeds, the excess reserves, into treasuries that the Fed can just create money out of thin air and buy $50 billion worth like that? It's almost immoral. It's stupid. And I think the rest of the world is finally catching on to that. We saw China, Japan, South Korea, and many of the Asian nations, many of which these countries were adversaries, and now they are coming together in coordination, their statement was committed to reducing dollar dependence, expanding trade in local currencies, and resisting U.S.-centric protectionism. And so there's a very interesting set of events, if you'll indulge me, that have happened over the last couple of weeks. And I really believe they've been missed by even the people in this industry. There's one or two very, very big things that I think need to be understood, and it centers around China. And well, let me just mention the story, and then I'll give the back end and see if we can all connect the dots here. So 2 weeks ago, the People's Bank of China came out and said that they had connected its digital RMB cross-border settlement system, which is the mBridge. And the mBridge changed because of the way the Bank of International Settlements, in essence, pulled the plug on them at the 12th hour, which is a form of espionage, if you ask me, saying, well, we can't stand behind any program that would allow countries to sidestep U.S. sanctions. Well, they've been doing this for 4 years, the BIS Innovation Hub with China, Hong Kong, Thailand, and the UAE, and just realizing that Russia was the RM BRICS is certainly less than truthful, I believe. So they pulled the plug at the 12th hour, embarrassing the BRICS. So now they call it, in essence, the bridge. So they came out a couple weeks ago and said the People's Bank of China has connected its digital RMB cross-border settlement system to 10 Asian and 6 Middle Eastern nations. The Asian nations are those in Southeast Asia. That represents 38% of global trade. Now, this bridge technology, which is the mBridge, allows these countries to trade central bank digital currencies cross-border and settle in any imbalances in gold. That's what they've been doing. And remember, the unit settlement token that Dilma Rousseff, the former president of Brazil and the head of the New Development Bank, came out and said they've agreed in principle to, was 40% gold-backed, 60% BRICS plus currencies traded over mBridge. So they've kind of let that be quiet for a little bit. So now they're just talking about trading cross-border, but I'm going to connect the gold part in a minute. Anyways, this bridge technology, the article goes on to say, usurps SWIFT, which takes 3 to 5 days to clear, going through several intermediary banks, Western intermediary banks. This clears in 7 seconds, and it does so with 98% lower transaction fees. No SWIFT interference, and it is not compatible with the US dollar. So this is interesting. That gets way more interesting in a moment. So that to me is something that that we should certainly understand. But before I tell you what's much more interesting, I would like to expand it and say, 5 years ago when I jumped onto the BRICS, what turned me on to them originally was the understanding of the Belt Road Initiative. I don't know anyone that was talking about it back then, and I fixated on it. And it's the largest infrastructure project in human history, which is still underway today. It connects Asia, Africa, South America, parts of Europe with bridges and maritime channels and roads. And they go into these underdeveloped countries that are resource rich, and they build, gold and silver mines, oil refineries, and all the infrastructure to get it there. They have it patrolled by military and commerce, and that's it. And this represents, just in and of itself, the Belt Road, roughly 75% of human population, 50% of global GDP. Now, these countries are very closely aligned to the BRICS nations, but they're not in the BRICS.